Have you ever had your E sound like this? In this video, I'm going to show you some tips for how to fix this on your reed, including some tools that you will need to be able to fix the sagging E on your reed. And I'll be sure to include links down in the video description if you need to buy any tools or supplies that I use in this video. If this is the first time we're meeting, my name is Dr. Natalie Law, and I'm a professional bassoonist and bassoon teacher, and I love to help people just like you learn how to play the bassoon and start to feel confident playing this instrument. I offer a lot of free resources on this YouTube channel and on my website, including a fingering chart, which I'll link down to below. You just enter your email and I will give you a fingering chart that has my recommended fingerings and fingerings that I recommend for students to use. I also offer my own handmade professional bassoon reeds, and I also offer virtual lessons. So if you're looking for reeds or lessons or just general resources on the bassoon, be sure you're subscribed down below. When the E sags on the bassoon, it's a really common issue that we come across. And it typically happens because there's sort of a weak spot in the reed. Maybe it's been scraped a little bit too far, or maybe the cane is really soft, or it's just generally not great cane, and so it's just not cooperating correctly. In some cases, if the E is sagging, it's gone too far, especially if even when you sort of pinch down on the reed and try and force it to play the E, you can't, and it's still playing the E flat. No matter what you do, you can't get it to the E. If it's sagging that much, that's often an indicator that it's sort of too far gone and there's not a whole lot you can do. Although I do recommend that you try out the tips that I'm about to show you in this video on that reed. So if you have properly broken in your reed, put at least a few hours of playtime on it, given it a few days to try and harden up to get that E up to pitch, there are still a couple adjustments that you can actually make on the reed before you totally give up on it and throw it out. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that the reed is fully soaked. Remember that every time that we soak the reed, we want it to be completely covered in water, so that it's fully soaked. Obviously, if you try to make adjustments on a dry reed, you risk cracking it and totally ruining it. So any adjustments you make, you generally want to have the reed to be fully soaked. So after the reed has been soaking for a few minutes at least, pull it out of the water, and there's a couple things you want to check. So this wire right here on top is the top wire, the wire that's closest to the blade of the reed, or the first wire, the top or first wire, kind of interchangeable. This wire right here is the second, or sometimes called the middle wire. So the first wire that we're going to check is this middle wire. Now, this really happens on older reeds that you've been playing in for a while, and it really happens when you've been soaking the reed and then it dries out, and then soak the reed and it dries out, soak and dry out. And of course, wood expands when it's wet, and it contracts when it's dry, and that expansion contraction adjusts the wood size, and so therefore the wire might loosen up. So if you can see on this one, the wire is movable. I can kind of easily move it around, and I want to tighten that wire so that it's snug and that I can't just easily wiggle it with my fingers. So in order to do that, you have to have a mandrel. This is just kind of a basic mandrel. I guess you could call it a holding mandrel. It's kind of the standard type of mandrel that you're going to use just to make basic adjustments on the reed. And you want to insert the mandrel into the reed. And just as a quick note, if you don't already have a mandrel, I'll link down to where you can get one. Usually they're not too expensive, so it's not a bad idea to purchase one of these and just have them on hand so you can make wire adjustments like this. But if you didn't have the mandrel in the reed and you were trying to make adjustments on the wire, you would risk ruining the reed because there's no support from inside the reed. So put the mandrel in the reed, and of course the reed is still soaked. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift up this wire here, so it'll look something like that. So what I'm doing is I'm grasping the wire and I'm going to pull a little bit, and then I'm going to twist the wire. I'm not sure if you can actually see this on camera, but if you take a close look at your reed, you can tell what direction the wire was twisted in the first place. Look at the wire and how it's twisted, and try to imagine how it was twisted in when it was originally formed. And you're going to twist in that same direction. In most cases, and if you're playing on my reeds specifically, you're going to twist counterclockwise. So your wrist will twist towards you. So I'm going to pull a little bit, and then I'm going to twist. And then I might pull one more time, pull, and then twist. And then to this point, now I can check the wire to see if it's still moving or if it's pretty tight. And in this case, it's not moving when I move my finger against it. Now, one other thing to look out for, it is possible if you are very, very strong to go too tight on this wire. You don't want to use your absolute superhuman strength. In some cases, you can squeeze the cane too much. And if you see the cane sort of like caving in on the sides there when you squeeze the wire, that's too much, because you don't want to take away from the structural integrity of the tube by squeezing too tight on the wire. So use most of your strength, but not all of your strength, if that makes sense. Okay, so now I have adjusted the second wire, and I'm going to take my pliers and just sort of move it back down so that it is back in its original position here. So it'll look like that. Now, usually at this point you want to test the reed to see if that made the difference. You can also check your first wire here. Now, the first wire is different from the second wire. The first wire needs to actually have a little bit of give in it. It needs to be able to move when you move it. It needs to be able to move just slightly. Obviously, you don't want it loose enough that it's going to slide all the way down, but you want it to have a little bit of give. Right now, I've artificially tightened this right now to kind of show you I can't move this wire, so this is not good. So what I want to do is I want to do the opposite of what I did with my second wire. So I'm going to do the same thing where I opened up the wire, lifted up the wire so that I can make an adjustment on it. And so I twisted counterclockwise on the second wire to tighten it, but I actually want to loosen this, so I need to go clockwise on this wire. Now again, if you're playing on my reeds, that's absolutely true. Some people twist their wire in the opposite direction when they're tightening. So just kind of look at the wire loops and how it would, and try to imagine which way it was tightened, and then you can loosen it in the opposite direction. So I'm not even really gonna pull the wire. I'm just sort of holding it right here, and I'm going to twist it to give it a little bit of room there. I don't think you can see this super well on camera, but I just made a little bit of space, and so now I can pretty easily wiggle the wire. It has a little bit of give in it. Not enough, obviously, to slide down all the way, but it has a little bit of give, and that's what I need to make it in the proper strength. So then I put the wire back where it was, and then the reed is back to the way that I had it, and now I would try it and see if that fixed the problem. I find that it's more common that the second wire has gotten loose, or it was too loose to start with, and that's what's causing the E to sag, because there's not enough strength and stability in the tube to keep the E from sagging. The top wire being too tight is less common of an issue, but I have found that before, that sometimes I've accidentally tightened that wire just a touch too tight, and I have to go back and loosen it when I go to test the reed and find out that my E's not working. So check both wires. Remember, the second wire should be pretty snug, pretty tight, shouldn't be able to move it with your fingers. First wire, you want a little bit of give when you try to move it, because you don't want the top wire, the first wire, to be so tight that it clamps down any vibration in the reed. Remember, there still has to be vibration that moves through the reed. So it's always this balance between allowing the vibration but also giving the reed stability, and that's kind of the functions of these two wires on the reed. Now, if you've tested the reed after making these wire adjustments and the E is still sagging, take note if the E is still doing the exact same thing as it was before, or possibly it's even worse, then changing the wires isn't going to fix it, obviously. If you notice that it got a little bit better after adjusting the wires, go back and mess with the wires again, and maybe tighten the second wire just a little bit more. Maybe, mess with the tightness of the first wire. Keep messing with the wires if the E got a little bit better, but not 100%, because maybe you did a little bit, but you haven't done quite enough. And remember, any adjustments that you make sure that the mandrel is inserted in the reed so that it can support the tube. If wire adjustments don't help, the reed is still doing, has a sagging E, there is one other thing that you can try. Sometimes a sagging E is caused by the length of the blade of the reed being too long for just the certain dimensions of that reed, and it just needs a little bit of cane clipped off the tip. This is a little less common, but there are some reeds out there, especially if you're buying store-bought reeds. I find that kind of cheaper, lower quality reeds tend to be a little bit long and sometimes flat. So if you find that you're flat in general across all of your notes, not just on the E, that's a really good indication that the reed is just a little bit too long and you need to clip a little bit off of it. If everything else on your instrument is in tune, but it's only the E that is sagging, I would be hesitant to clip the tip, because that will affect everything on the instrument. So just kind of keep that in mind. What's the pitch like on the entire range of the instrument? So if everything's flat on the instrument and the E is still sagging and you want to clip the tip, this thing right here is a tip cutter, or you might call it a guillotine. And this is what I use to clip the tips of my reed. You simply put the reed on this little mandrel here, and then you put the reed at what measurement you want it at. There's actually a little millimeter measurement thing right here that you use to place it, and then you pull this down and it clips the tip of the reed. I'll go ahead and show you just so you can see. This reed is already clipped, so I'm just going to take a tiny bit off. This is my guinea pig reed. But I got it to the length of the blade that I wanted it to go. Then I just pull this back, and it cut a little bit off the tip. You can see kind of these little shavings off the reed. I believe this is a Solutions tip cutter. Rieger makes a really good tip cutter. This one I've had for years and it's worked fine for me. These are kind of expensive. I'm not sure of the price right now, but you're looking at least a couple $100. So if you are really serious about reed making, this is the most accurate, consistent way to cut tips on reeds, and it's a good thing to have around even if you're not making your own reeds, but it allows you to adjust the tip. Now, if you don't have one of these, and I would expect that many of you, if you're not into reed making, you probably don't have one of these. There is another way to cut the tip of a reed, and you have to have one of these little cutting block things. I'll link this again down in the description. I used this for several years before I bought my tip cutter, and it worked fine for me. You have to be careful that you're not cutting at an angle, and you have to be very careful, because you're putting pressure down with a sharp object, and it can be dangerous if the razor slips, or if you're cutting with a knife, the knife slips. But essentially, you put the reed on the chopping block. Again, you still want it soaked. My reed is still soaked from when I soaked it before. And I'm going to use a razor. I've used a knife before. This is a brand new sharp razor. Let's see. I'm going to try and, this is a very awkward angle for me, but I'm going to try and cut this so that you can see what I'm doing. So let's see. Let's say I get the razor in the place that I want to cut, and then I just press straight down, and you can see that I cut off part of the reed. This is my guinea pig reed. It's gone by this point. But you can see I did this at a very odd angle, but you can see this is kind of what happens if you're not being careful. You get kind of an angled cut. So if you are using this method, just be very careful about how you're cutting, because it is easy to really do a whack job on the tips of the reeds. So just FYI, just be careful. So again, this is my go-to. It's the most accurate, consistent way to cut reed tips. A much cheaper option is this cutting block and a razor or a very sharp knife. With a knife, you get a little bit more leverage when you cut, but a knife is rarely as sharp as a brand new, fresh, sharp razor. One other thing that's really important, if you're going to cut the tip off the reed, that totally changes the tip profile of the reed, essentially, because you probably can't tell super well on camera, but that's a really thick tip. The cane is really thick because I've cut the thinnest part off. I need to redo the end of the reed. The easiest way to do that is just to take sandpaper, and I've shown this in my other videos, but maybe like a 30-degree angle, pull it back a few times on each side. Whatever you do to one side, you want to do to the other side. That will get you started. If you're comfortable with a knife would be more effective. But if you're only cutting a very thin sliver off the tip, and then you should be able to just use sandpaper to bring it down to about what it was before. And then at this point, I would try it on your bassoon, see if that E is sagging. You might find that the reed is a little bit resistant. If the reed is more resistant, keep using the sandpaper, or if you're comfortable with a knife, use the end of a knife to just nip a little bit off that edge there so that you can have good response. If this video was helpful for you, please make sure you subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, and comment down below, have you ever had this issue with your reeds where the E sags? And if so, have you been able to fix it either with some of the tips that I showed you today or by doing something else with your reeds? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear from you.